For this demonstration, I'm back to using the pillowcase that I had for the other demonstrations because it's 100% cotton and it's very easy to work with. I'm just going to use this to demonstrate how to do a back stitch. Now, a back stitch, there's a clue in the name, is that when you're stitching you go back over into the stitch and then you come out. So a simple back stitch, we begin with our threaded needle, and I have single thread, and I'm going to anchor one end of the fabric down on the table so that it holds, and I'm going to pick up the fabric and I'm going to go in with my needle and take one stitch, and then I'm going to go back in where the knot is, and then I'm going to come forward, come out with the needle forward of that, the same distance as I've already taken, and it creates a loop there, and on the back you can see that it has a longer stitch. Now I'm going to go back and then go down into that same place again and come out forward of that stitch, and it creates a stitch, and just repeat. Now this is a back stitch, and there are different ways of creating a back stitch. This is a continuous back stitch, and it recreates something that looks like you'd find coming out of a sewing machine, and on the back side it has longer loops. Okay, so now the other, I'll bring it close to the screen in a minute. The other back stitch is where you take one running stitch, come out, and you go back and come out, and then you take another stitch forward, okay, that's a running back stitch as well, and from the back you can see it leaves gaps in between. So that is the second type of running stitch, or back stitch, I'm sorry. So there is a difference between the two different types of back stitches. There's a continuous back stitch and there's the other, or simple back stitch. Now I'll just bring this up to the screen that you can see it a little bit more closely. So that is the first back stitch. It's a continuous back stitch, and from the back you can see what it looks like. And then this one was created where you take one back stitch and then you skip and you go over and you jump it, which creates this look on the back. So those are the two different types of back stitches. Now they are used for decorative purposes, but also the back stitch is a construction stitch, which will hold two or more layers of fabric together, as in a seam. I'll just go over it one more time. I'll do it close up. Put your pin in, come out, and go back in, and come out forward of that the same amount, and just repeat. Okay, so that is the simple instructions of a back stitch. Okay, so that is a continuous back stitch. And then the other one, the second one, is you take a stitch and you go back and then you jump the same amount and go forward, and you do that again. Now, one obviously is stronger than the other, but they do have their purposes, which I will go into in more detail as we go into the project. Now, these are very large stitches for the purposes of demonstration, but depending on what you use them for, you will make them longer or shorter. Another variation on the second back stitch is that you take a longer stretch in between and do a back stitch, and you can see the distance between each back stitch is considerably longer. And this type of back stitch is also a permanent back stitch, but it is more applicable for inside work. And what I mean by that is to hold layers of seam allowances together when a lining is installed in a garment. So there's 3 different styles, and also the other thing to remember about back stitches is that they can go through 1 or more layers. If it goes through a single layer, it is most likely used for decorative purposes. If it is used to hold 2 or more layers of fabric together, this stitch is a permanent stitch. You don't remove it. All the ones that I've talked about up until now are temporary stitches that are meant to be removed.